Hello. The theoretical issues that I will address have to do with what tests should look like and what they should do. These issues have a great deal to do with how a group of teachers feels their course or program fits pedagogically within the overall field of language teaching, and how well they communicate their beliefs about teaching and testing with each other. After all, teachers can create curriculum and tests that are at least coordinated within and between courses so that students do not face a confusing set of disconnected teaching and testing methods. Theoretical issues discussed in the lecture include pedagogical beliefs in various language teaching methodologies ranging from grammar translation to communicative language teaching, or beliefs in the relative importance of the skills that teachers teach and test in their program. Other theoretical issues range from the linguistic distinction between competence and performance to the purely testing distinction among the various types of tests that are available in language teaching. Please remember, they are theoretical viewpoints on what tests should look like and what they should do.
Hello and welcome back. Today we are talking about the purposes of assessment. Now this of course is a $100 question. Why do we assess? Why do we bother to do it? So today you will be thinking about the different reasons for using assessment. But before we start, let me ask you a question. How do you feel about assessment? Okay, so you can't tell me, so I'm giving you two options. Did you feel like this? Do you think, wow, assessment is great, I love assessment? Or did you feel like this? Oh, I hate assessment. I have to say, a common complaint of many teachers is, I have so much assessment to do. So I think many teachers are thinking more in that blue-faced look. And of course, you've probably been thinking of that question as a teacher. So how do you think your students feel about assessment? Do you think that they are happy or unhappy? What I want to suggest to you is that if you're inclining towards the blue face down there, then maybe you're not thinking about the purposes for assessment in a holistic enough fashion. So let's look at some of the purposes for assessment, some of the reasons why we assess. The first one is obvious enough, to find out what's been learned. And for many teachers, that's related to a second point, which is this one, to make a judgment about the learners, probably because you have to give them a mark or a grade. And I'm guessing that for most people watching this video, those two reasons are what come to mind initially when you think about why do we do assessment. But there are some others which I think are important, and I'm going to mention those now. A good one is to provide feedback. Probably a nice example of this is for teachers who teach writing and who use a process approach. Often there's one piece of writing that is read and assessed and feedback is given. And then the learners have to use that feedback to rewrite what they've already written. And that second piece of writing is also assessed. So assessing to provide feedback is important. And of course, one result of providing feedback is that we lead to improvement. And that, of course, should be the goal of assessment, to foster learning, to make learning better. The last point I'm going to mention is one that I think many teachers don't think about, and that's this one. It's about to motivate. You just think about it. We want to give learners the experience of success. We want students to go away from our classes thinking, oh, I've learned something. I can do something I haven't done before. So one way of providing that motivation is through assessment and testing. If they do well, they go away feeling good. Now I will just say one other thing related to that leading to improvement point. It's not just for learners that we need to seek improvement. It's also for teachers. Through the results of testing and assessment, we know if we are successful or not. And if we're not successful, we also need to make changes. So let's think about assessment in new ways. Let's think about assessment so that we move from this view of it being something rather unpleasant to something that's actually not so bad after all. To move from the unhappy to the happy face. Remembering always that assessment and testing is not something that is done to students. It is something that is done for students. Thank you.
Since views of what constitutes good language teaching vary widely throughout the profession, ideas about what constitutes good testing or a good test will also differ. How did language testing get from the extreme views of Miss Vidic to the more modern views of Sabian? So, let's talk about language testing movements, which can be said to all coexist today in different parts of the world. As can be seen in the table, there are 4 main testing movements accordingly related to language teaching methods. First, the pre-scientific movement in language testing is associated with the grammar translation approaches to language teaching. It is characterized by translation and essay tests developed exclusively by the classroom teachers, who are on their own when it comes to developing and scoring tests. Second, psychometric structuralist tests typically set out to measure the discrete structural points being taught in the audiolingual and related teaching methods of the time. Third, the integrative movement has its roots in the argument that language is creative and more than the sum of the discrete parts being tested in psychometric structuralist tests. It led to further arguments for the benefits of integrative tests with regard to pragmatics, the ways that linguistic and extra-linguistic elements of language are interrelated and relevant to human experience. Tests typical of this movement were the cloze test and dictation. Lastly, communicative movement with basic characteristics in 2 categories. As for test setting requirements, the communication that is required of the students should be meaningful. It's also important to create a situation that is as authentic as possible. Moreover, the students should encounter unpredictable language input and be put in a position where they must produce creative language output. Finally, just like in real life, students should be using all 4 language skills, including reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Next, there is 3 characteristics for the basis for rating such tests. To begin with, those ratings should also be based at least to some degree on students' relative success in getting their meanings across. In addition, the ratings should focus on language use rather than usage, which means in some cases that the focus is on fluency rather than accuracy. Finally, ratings should perhaps include new rating components, in addition to the traditional phonemes, graphemes, vocabulary, and grammar, like paralinguistic features, pragmatics, strategic use, and so forth. In general, understanding these movements and their relationships to language teaching is important for understanding the very purpose of our test and the degree to which the test is meeting that purpose. That is the validity of your test. The distinction was originally proposed by Chomsky between competence, the speaker's knowledge of his language, and performance, the actual use of language in concrete situations. If linguistic performance is viewed as imperfect and full of flaws, even in native speakers, such performances can only be taken to be the outward manifestations of the underlying but unobservable linguistic competence. And if such a difference exists for native speakers of a language, the difference may be even more pronounced in non-native speakers. This distinction can help teachers to realize that tests are at best fairly artificial observations of a student's performance, and performance is only an imperfect reflection of the underlying competence. The important thing to remember is that language testing can provide an estimate of a student's performance, sometimes from various angles as in listening, reading, and grammar subtests, but never provides a direct measure of the actual competence that underlies the performance. Another issue which concerns language testers has to do with the different types of tests, which can range from discrete point tests to integrative tests. Discrete point tests are those which measure the small bits and pieces of a language, as in a multiple choice test made up of questions constructed to measure students' knowledge of different structures. Integrative tests are those designed to use several skills at one time. Consider dictation as a test type. The student is usually asked to listen carefully and write down a short prose passage as it is read aloud 3 times. The skills involved are, at least, listening comprehension and writing. But different aspects of these 2 skills come into play as well, such as grammar, vocabulary, and spelling knowledge. In short, I've just given an overview of theoretical background for adopting and developing tests. You should now be able to answer the takeaway questions as follows. 1. What are main language test movements? What are their characteristics? 2. What is the linguistic distinction between performance and competence? 3. What is the distinction between discrete point tests and integrative tests? Thank you, and see you in the next video about adopting and developing language tests.